Welcome, everyone. I think we're either all good afternoons or good evenings at this point in the day. There's not much west of California that I think is joining us today. So thank you all so much for joining our webinar today, really focusing on glyphosate, what the story to this point has been, the damage that it has done and is continuing to do to our soils, our environment, and humans, and what the path ahead looks like, and how we can reverse this damage. My name is Jessica Hulse. I'm the director of the Soil and Climate Alliance, which is an initiative of Green America focusing on the regenerative transition of all 960 million domestic acres onto the regenerative pathway, with the goals of restoring our soil health, regenerating our climate, and ensuring the economic success of our farmers, farm workers, and rural communities. Thank you all for joining myself and the amazing speakers that have come together today to talk to us about their work, their research, and their role in this journey that we are all engaging upon. We are going to go ahead and jump in with our first speaker today. Dr. Melissa Perry is the Dean at the College of Public Health at George Mason University. Prior to coming to this position at Mason, she served as the professor and chair of the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health at the Milken School of Public Health in George Washington University from 2011 to 2022. Dr. Perry is also a member of the research team at the Ramazzini Institute, leading the Global Glyphosate Study, whose head, Dr. Daniele Mandrioli, you will hear from next. So Melissa, with that, please take it away and talk to us about what are we seeing as the impact of glyphosate on human health?
Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it. I'm really delighted to be here. I really wanted to dive in to talk about herbicides, glyphosate in particular, with an emphasis on children's health. Wanted to tell you a bit
just
about.
A quick heads up, we're seeing the whole presenter.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah. Let's see
if this works.
Bear with us, everybody. No. Or we can leave it like this and folks can just see what's going on. Either way.
I can do a stop share and get out of presenter mode. That might help.
Let's give that a try. I love that after 3 years, PowerPoint has not made this any easier on any of us.
How about this? Does that work?
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay, terrific. So delighted to be here. I really wanted to give you my perspectives, having done research in pesticides for a really long time. I grew up in northern Vermont. And then after going to the University of Vermont as an undergrad, I pursued master's and doctoral degrees at Johns Hopkins. I started to do research in pesticides back in 1994. And it was really recognizing that farmers from my community were being exposed to pesticides, and they really had no awareness about what that might mean in terms of their health and also their family's health, even though there was mounting epidemiologic evidence to demonstrate that farmers were at higher risk for rare cancers and pesticides were suspected. So this is 94. I developed a lab in looking at the health effects of pesticides at Harvard, at the Harvard School of Public Health, and then moved that lab to George Washington University in DC, and was a chair there for 12 years. And now I just have arrived as the inaugural dean of the College of Public Health at George Mason University. Suffice it to say that at this point in my career, I would have expected that we would have been making a bigger dent in seeing a decline in pesticide exposures. And unfortunately, it's quite the contrary, and that includes for glyphosate. I wanted to anchor back to 1993 as well. As I said, I started researching these issues for pesticide health effects. It was actually more of a safety awareness lens that I originally took for farmers, and then got deeper and deeper into health effects. And I wanted to anchor to 1993, where my colleague, and I really want to extend a thank you to Dr. Phil Landerkin, who shared some of these slides with me, really a foremost international expert on the impacts of pesticides in children. So here was the National Academy's commission report demonstrating some key findings back in 93, that children are especially vulnerable during the months of pregnancy, and this vulnerability extends into the first years after birth, that children have greater exposures pound for pound than adults. Again, this was implemented in 1993, and that children clearly have a reduced capacity to detoxify and excrete pesticides. And so the general mantra that came from that report is that children are not little adults. And for too long, the regulatory model was making those faulty assumptions. So fast forward, here we are in current day, and what the trends have been as it relates to the production of chemicals globally, that it continues to increase with an overall doubling time between 25 and 30 years. And also here we are with the Centers for Disease Control explaining now how we understand that the average American who might be in one of these representative studies is going to have between 200 and 300 different chemicals that have been manufactured and that's been detected. So those have been blockbuster, staggering findings. At the same time, so we understand what the proliferation of chemicals have been, the continuous manufacturing of chemicals, and then we also understand continuous mounting evidence that has consumed my whole career of the fact that, in fact, if you're putting pesticides out in the environment, inevitably human beings are going to be exposed. So I look at this curve. This is the increasing use of glyphosate over time. And I look at it and I recall back into the mid and later 90s. I was doing research in Wisconsin at the time. Again, I really just wanted to understand what farmers knew about their pesticide exposure, what they thought about it, what their awareness was about health and safety. And to be honest, we were doing systematic studies and we were actually measuring pesticides in urine, but we didn't pay attention to glyphosate. Glyphosate was not restricted at the time. And it was this unanimous assumption that this was unrestricted and therefore low toxicity and therefore safe. And so as I look at this rapid rise of glyphosate use in the United States, I really reflect on my belief back in the late 90s that this curve actually would be going down. And it explains why it has been so rapid, because we have been somewhat apathetic and turned a blind eye to assume that glyphosate was safe and not problematic. Well, in 2015, there was a blockbuster moment when the International Agency for Research on Cancer determined that glyphosate was a probable human carcinogen. And that was based on one of the most in-depth, rigorous, robust reviews that had ever been conducted prior. So that was a wake-up moment for the world to understand what the threats were, and that we had irrefutable evidence according to this very august scientific panel. So why this rise? Why is glyphosate continuing to increase, the consumption of glyphosate continuing to increase? Well, I'm sure many members of our audience are very familiar with genetically modified organisms. And so interestingly enough, the seed industry and ultimately pesticide industry has figured out a way to modify plants genetically and therefore be resistant to increasing use of herbicides, but then also requiring use. So it's a convenient coupling of modify the seed itself and also dose or spray or utilize heavily the pesticide, in this case, glyphosate. And so in reality, 90% of corn and soybeans and cotton in the US is GMO. And the same companies that produce GMO seeds also make the herbicides that are sprayed on them. I know this is not news to many of our audience members, but it has been very important for me to understand these trends over time and really take a historical perspective. So here we are with the herbicide treadmill, and talk about eye-opening. When I first started to interview Wisconsin farmers and ask them, again, what do you know about how much you're being exposed? And what do you think about the potential risks and relationships to cancer? To which they'd say, I need these these chemicals in order to be productive. That's what I have to focus on. And all of my training has taught me how to use them and how to formulate them. But the health and safety, not so much. I just have to trust that I'm going to be okay. Well, we see what that cycle is. So let's continue to use more herbicides. That further puts pressure on weeds. Weeds are like all other pests. They're very smart in being able to outsmart the injury and insult of a herbicide. That's going to create more resistance that ultimately leads to more spraying. And if there's one thing I've learned about the pesticide research I've conducted, we do have a tendency to go to that easy fix, that magic bullet, and oftentimes applying more chemical is our reflex response. Let's just keep dosing more and further, and we dig ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole. So currently it's estimated that there are glyphosate resistant weeds on over 150 million acres in the US, and there doesn't seem to be any innovation or ability to prevent that resistance from happening. And it's the same cycle that happens with insecticides, fungicides, etc. I just wanted to point to the fact that we're seeing, ever since 2015, we're seeing much greater awareness in the health, public health, biomedical, toxicology, environmental health communities to recognize how glyphosate is showing up. Imagine that we didn't even have the ability to measure it in the body until very, very recently, just in the last couple of years. And now that we have that ability, it's no surprise that studies, well-conducted, rigorous studies, are now demonstrating that, yes, indeed, glyphosate is in the urine of adults, children, pregnant women. Yes, indeed, it's in our environment. And yes, indeed, we're seeing connections and associations with a variety of health issues, including pregnancy and preterm birth, as well as developmental issues. So this keeps on growing. These are studies just in the last 2 years. So what's the future? I just wanted to recap so I can turn things over to my colleague from the Ramazzini Institute. As I say, we just really arrived with, we as in the scientific community, arrived with a validated biomarker of glyphosate exposure. It took us that long to even figure out how to measure it in the body. We do have those biomarkers now. Now, how do we do that in conjunction with the multiple other pesticides that we are exposed to on a daily basis? The estimate is somewhere around 12 on most days. So we, as epidemiologists, as toxicologists, we take a single pesticide kind of approach because our methods only allow for that kind of complexity. But in reality, there's an inevitable synergy and interaction with the many chemicals that we're exposed just by virtue of living in the world. And then this is a great handoff to my colleague Daniele, and that is going deeper in understanding what are the mechanisms that are affecting the health effects. And that's where I say, I feel as though I've dedicated a career to trying to unlock this information. And so the work has to go forward. It has to be widely supported. It has to be funded. These are very, very hard studies to get funded in this day and age. And it has to be further promoted. And we have to join together to better communicate what is known with some pretty strong certainty and what else needs to be known. So that's my presentation. I hope I did well on time. And let me turn things over to Daniele.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perry. That was an amazing sort of primer for all of us to set the stage around what glyphosate is, what ag chemicals are, what the impact is. We're so excited, and we could have just gone directly to Daniele, but we'll do a quick introduction. We're so excited to have Dr. Daniele Mandrioli join us. He is the Associate Director of the Maltoni Cancer Research Center at the Ramazzini Institute. He has been focused on environmental and occupational toxicology, I can pronounce that word, and evidence-based message and regulatory sciences. And He is helping to lead what you are now about to hear about, the Global Glyphosate Study. Dr. Perry showed us a number of studies that have been done in this space. Those of you who've been with the Soil and Climate Alliance for a while know we've worked with Dr. Paul Winchester, Dr. John Fagan, a number of researchers who have been looking at glyphosate and its impact. But this Global Glyphosate Study, bringing together partners from around the world, research subjects from around the world, is the first comprehensive look at both the immediate and long-term impacts on human health and development caused by glyphosate. So Daniele, with that, please take it away and walk us through this both amazing and rather unsettling data that you all are putting together for us.
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to present our new results from the Global Glyphosate Study today. And we start from who was Bernardino Ramazzini, the person that our institute is named after. He was the one that said that prevention was better than cure already in 1700. And how this is still true 300 years after is and will be clearly shown during our presentation today. And just a disclosure of what the Ramazzini Institute is. We are a no-profit research entity, and we are focused on the prevention of environmental and occupational disease, with over 35,000 members in our country that support our research and support our independence, which is a core value of our work. We have been doing research on cancer and other toxicological outcomes for more than 50 years now in a very unique venue, which is the Castle of Bentivoglio in the province of Bologna, that have been donated to Professor Maltoni, our founder, around 52 years ago, after the first results that he had on the first carcinogen that we did study, which was vinyl chloride. And since then, we did study over 200 compounds, and we are the largest carcinogenicity assay program in Europe and second in the world after the program of the US government, the US National Toxicology Program. So of these 200 compounds that we tested over the years, around the half have been shown to be carcinogenic. And some of them, like World Trade Center dust, asbestos, benzene, formaldehyde, diesel exhaust, have been discovered for the first time as carcinogen, as experimental carcinogen in our very lab. And we have been able with our model, which is the same model that is still in use also at the US National Toxicology Program, to anticipate sometime 30 years before in our experimental model what was then shown to be carcinogenic in humans as well. Starting from vinyl chloride, chromium compounds, benzene, trichloroethylene, silica dust, asbestos, formaldehyde, we have been able to anticipate the carcinogenicity in humans for decades. And this is not something that have been repeated only for a few chemicals. It's around 100 chemicals now that have been shown to be carcinogenic in our model, among them different pesticides, like, for example, mancozeb. So we did decide to tackle the issue of glyphosate with the Global Glyphosate Study. And the Global Glyphosate Study, as you heard from Dr. Perry, is a collaborative study at a global scale. So with Dr. Perry at George Mason, but also Boston College, University of Padua, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, University of Paraná. So we made a team with all these independent academic institutions all over the world to tackle an issue, which was, in fact, glyphosate, #1 pesticide in the world in terms of exposure. So we did start with a pilot study, and the pilot study aimed to be to give us a first glance on the possible toxicological effects of glyphosate. And then we did move forward with an integrated study, which included many more outcomes, 3 doses, and not only glyphosate, but also 2 formulations. So the first results of the pilot study, which was done at a dose that is considered safe in US, so 1.75 milligram per kilogram of body weight, was already performed, and the first results were already published and shown at, again, doses that were admitted in the US. Alteration of the microbiome, alteration in the development and the endocrine system, alteration at metabolomic levels, and increase of micronuclei. Micronuclei are the main biomarker of substances that are capable of inducing lymphoma and leukemia. And as you heard, non-Hodgkin lymphoma is actually what was already considered as an important target cancer for glyphosate by the World Health Organization, in particular IARC, which is the branch of the World Health Organization that evaluates carcinogen. And they did consider glyphosate as a probable carcinogen because of an increase of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Along with glyphosate, other 2 organophosphate were classified as carcinogenic. So this is a remarkable result, particularly considering, again, that these are admitted doses in the US. But what is even more disturbing is that the results that we did observe in the developmental phase in our experimental model in rodents have been confirmed just last year in a US cohort of pregnant women and newborns. And what are these results? These results show elongation of anogenital distance, which is a very important biomarker of endocrine disruption that in our experimental model was also associated with an increase of testosterone in females and a delay of the first estrus in female as well. So our results were, again, rapidly translated and unfortunately confirmed in humans. And this motivated us to do a more integrated and expanded design of study. With the integrated study, we aim to tackle the effects of glyphosate alone, but also of 2 formulations, the US formulation Ranger Pro and the European formulation Roundup Bioflow. The Ranger Pro contains POEA, which is forbidden in Europe. Bioflow, it's still a trade secret. What are the ingredients, the adjuvants present in the formulation? And we started from doses that were even lower than the one admitted in the US. So the admittable daily intake in the EU, which is 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight. And we went up to 50 milligram per kilogram of body weight. So we did aim to tackle with this integrated design carcinogenicity, short-term and long-term toxicity, prenatal developmental toxicity, neurotoxicity, multi-generational toxicity, endocrine disruption and microbiome, and many other outcomes, including the mechanistic outcomes that you heard from Dr. Perry, that are so relevant for the evaluation and risk assessment in this moment. So this is the largest study ever performed on pesticides. And, oh, sorry, that the slide is stuck. Try to go to the next one. Okay. And what we did already observe with the first results of the integrated study, not only we did confirm the first evidence that we observed that the doses admitted in the US, also at the lowest doses that are admitted in Europe. And we did see a dose response, which meant that increasing doses at increasing alterations on the microbiome, but we also observed statistically significant alteration of the fungi, so the microbiome. So both bacteria and fungi were altered in the exposed rodents. And not only this was observed, but also an effect that is surprising, because in these first results, we did explore outcomes in what would be young adult animals. And we did observe an increase of kidney and liver lesions, which are generally not at all observed at this age in these rodents. And we did observe them in glyphosate. We did observe them even at higher degrees in the formulations. We did observe them in both males and females. So at those that are currently considered safe in the EU and in the US, we already saw different statistical significant alteration and effects. And in particular, our endocrine disruptive effects that have been observed in our model earlier have been just confirmed in human cohorts in the US. We did already observe an increase of alteration of the microbiome, alteration in the liver and kidney at doses that, again, are currently admitted. And by 2023, we aim to produce all the results of the carcinogenicity and long-term study, a reproductive toxicity study, because we know that by 2023 in the EU, there will be a decision about the relicensing of glyphosate. And also there's an ongoing evaluation in the US of the safety of glyphosate. So it's crucial that we produce this evidence as rapidly, consistently, and solidly as we can together with our partners. And let me thank our team at the Ramazzini Institute at our castle. And we had a major storm in our area today, but our 500 years old castle resisted along with our team. So we'll move forward with the work. And I thank you very much also with our partners of the Global Glyphosate Study for your consideration and attention today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniele, for all of that data. And we're excited to see what continues to develop and what stories we can continue to say about the impact of glyphosate on ourselves, on our future generations. Very excited to shift from this amazing heavy data into how do we tell the story behind the data. And our next speaker today, Jennifer Baichwal, has been directing and producing documentaries for 25 years, including 10 feature documentaries, which have played around the world, winning awards and bringing to light these issues that some of us know are issues, some of us don't know are issues. But once we all are aware of what's going on, we want to make big changes. Some of her work you may have heard of is Watermark, about the human interaction with water around the world. And the piece that we're really excited to dig into today is Into the Weeds, the Dwayne Lee Johnson versus the Monsanto Company. You all are probably familiar with the landmark case settled in California a few years ago, where Lee Johnson, a gardener for a public school system who was almost every day using glyphosate because we've got to have those green lawns for our kids. No, secret, we don't. Was exposed, developed the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that Daniele referenced in his work, and then sued Monsanto, receiving $1 billion verdict in his favor. The number has been knocked down, but in the end, the money was not what we were looking for. It was that admittance that Monsanto knew that glyphosate was dangerous, knew that glyphosate could do this, and continued to push it. So Jennifer, please tell us about your journey to being our storyteller. Tell us about this film, and let's really dive into this piece.
Thank you so much for having me. And I will say, actually, his verdict was $289 million. It was $250 million punitive damages and $39 million in compensatory damages. And of course, that went down and down and down and down until I think the final verdict was somewhere around $20 million. But yes, I'm a filmmaker. I've been making films for 25 years. And I turned to film as an academic. I was on my way to doing a PhD in theology and philosophy, and I kind of recognized the limitations of that method of inquiry. And I was trying to look for something that could move people intellectually, emotionally, and viscerally all at the same time. Because I think that that is actually what we need to shift consciousness in order to change. And interestingly, I was on a panel with this filmmaker, Louis Seihos, who made The Cove. You might know his work, and Extinction, Racing Extinction. But he said that he was talking to a neuroscientist who said that 90 minutes is the average length it takes for somebody to change their mind about something. And of course, 90 minutes is generally kind of the length of a feature film or a feature documentary. I will just say before I start this film began at the Sundance Film Festival. I was there with Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, which was our last film that was included a museum exhibition, 2 books, an educational program, and a film. And an old friend of ours from the Waterkeeper movement, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who I know, people have mixed feelings about him, but he was and has been and continues to be a stellar environmental fighter for many years. And he came to help us introduce the film and to sort of talk about it, because he was also involved with our project Watermark, where we filmed waterkeepers around the world. And when I asked him what he was working on, he said, I'm working on these Roundup trials. And I said, well, who's documenting that? And he said, nobody's documenting it. It was just one of those things that it was impossible not to do. And as we got further and further into it, first meeting the lawyers who were part of the executive of the multi-district litigation, who agreed to work with us, meeting a number of plaintiffs, meeting Lee, really knowing that Lee was the center of the story in some way. And then also how to weave in these bigger issues, because film, and really any good story, is a kind of a dialectic between detail and scale, or the personal, the particular, and the bigger picture. So in terms of the bigger picture, this film explores corporate malfeasance, agency capture, the limitations of mass torts as a tool for justice. And then, of course, the systemic repercussions of pesticide use and the ubiquity of use when it comes to glyphosate, which we know is the world's most widely used herbicide. In terms of the personal or the particular, Lee's story, as well as the echoes of a number of other plaintiffs, became the way into the story emotionally. And I will say that as a documentary filmmaker, the ethics of engagement are probably the most important thing that I do, because pointing a camera in somebody's face can be very aggressive, especially when they are vulnerable. And there are some scenes in this film that are hard to watch, but they're scenes that Lee wanted us to film just to show how difficult it was to get up and get out of bed every morning. So when you do see it, I would keep that in mind. And we developed a real relationship of trust. There is a story, a smaller story in the film about agriculture. And of course, we all know that industrial agriculture or conventional agriculture is supported by our systems, by our governments, by our insurance systems through subsidies. We know it's more difficult to get insurance for crops that are not conventional agriculture. And all of these things, this mindset of cash crops, of the opposite of regenerative farming, or polyculture farming, which is always about enriching the ecosystem, the biodiversity, the soil, and sort of being able to profit, but also revel in that healthy system. We do not have an agricultural system like that. And I think we should just look at one clip from one of our farmers. It's where he talks about why a clean field is important.
A clean field means that the only plant alive is the one you want. But the curse of the land is the weeds. They have to be sprayed. So one way or the other, when you're doing broad-scale farming, it's really hard not to accept the technology that's offered to you.
We're using this stuff to maintain profitability. The driver behind everything, more or less, is volume, is yield. The margins are so little, and so you got to have scale. To maximize your yield, you got to minimize your infestation of weeds.
So those are two farmers who we interviewed from Saskatchewan who are, grow soy, wheat, etc. And they talked about their experience. And I will say that in Lee's case, of course, he had an accident when he was working, and it has been brought up before, this question about what farmers know about their exposure. And of course, the number of times I heard during the course of this film that it was marketed to them as safe enough to drink, that it is absolutely non-systemic and not harmful. And when Lee had the accident, he was sort of soaked from head to toe because a line burst on his motor and the glyphosate was coming out, and he was trying to stop it from going to the drain and draining out into the ocean, and got soaked to the skin, and then developed a very rare form of NHL on his skin a while later, while he was still continuing to use it. And of course, this was the whole time that the IARC assessment was going on and the evaluation was going on. And the trial itself, Lee's trial, brought in a number of, what they call discovery, where in the old days that might have been two sets of lawyers sitting in an airplane hangar with, thousands of bankers' boxes going through files. Now it all happens in a supercomputer, and it's basically artificial intelligence that finds a way of sorting through targeted word searches what has happened in the past, 30 years of this company. And the corporate malfeasance that was uncovered in this discovery phase was absolutely shocking to me in terms of ghostwriting of papers, intimidation of independent science that went against what the industry wanted, falsification of data. You see all of it. The evidence is there. So what I found as we continued to film was the question of how corporations can have so much power, and the agencies that are meant to regulate those corporations, in fact, end up getting captured by them in some way, this revolving door of people who go back and forth between agency and corporation. So we learned a lot about that. And we also learned that mass torts as a tool of justice is an imperfect tool because they're money damages only. And in the end, many of these companies have the kind of resources to be able to pay those fines, pay out the lawsuits, and continue to operate. So unless and until there are other ways of punishing corporate malfeasance, such as criminal charges, I don't think that this is something that is going to change. Now, of course, given the ubiquity of use, and one of the things that we focused on here in Canada is the aerial spraying of forest plantations to get rid of broadleaf species so that the little spot pine and spruce saplings can grow. And of course, much of that happens on unceded Indigenous territory and all over the North. And it feels like such an overreaction to a problem because the whole ecosystem is affected. And we were following the traditional ecological knowledge elders, Ray Owl in particular, who has been fighting against this for years. But forestry companies are allowed to use glyphosate because it is supposed to be safe to get rid of these broadleaf species. And then the insects go, the birds go, the animals go, and the biodiversity is absolutely impacted. And I think I have two more clips, but this one is generally about what happens to biodiversity because of this ubiquity of use. Can we show that one now?
We need to have the natural funguses and bacteria in the soil. We need to have the natural pollinators. We need to have the birds. We need to have all of these things. And once you interrupt part of it, you interrupt all of it. This isn't something that is on the label, but this is something that is very real that we're all dealing with because we've interrupted that for 20 years here. Now we're trying to get it back.
We now have a large number of studies showing us these biodiversity decline, and not only in insects. So if we don't have a stable system of biodiversity, then we will have a larger number of problems. Biodiversity is the base for our life.
So the Krefeld Entomological Society in Northern Germany, that's the voice of one of the scientists there, and they've been doing continuous whole ecosystem research into insect decline, and they have seen a 70% decline in insect populations over the course of 30 years. And the systematic way that they do exactly the same kind of study and have been doing so for over 100 years, so that the data sets are comparable over timelines and therefore very reliable. And I will say that one of the things about making a film about a company like Monsanto, now Bayer, is that you can't make unfounded claims. These are not claims. This is not a polemic. It's not a Michael Moore film that throws out a bunch of allegations. Every single thing that we claimed in the film had to be either backed up by evidence, just like in court, or we had to provide all of our citations for amount of use, etc. So it was very carefully researched and vetted. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to get the insurance that we needed from our lawyers in order to show the film. One of the things that I found particularly sort of devastating was that these farmers that we talked to are in this very difficult position where they're dealing with big agribusiness. And as we now know, pharmaceutical and agribusiness is the same. But they don't have alternatives. They don't know what their alternatives are. Gary Gadd, for the first time, did not use glyphosate as a desiccant on his wheat crop a few years ago, and he lost everything. Now, the idea of spraying glyphosate as a desiccant on food before harvest, where it is being sprayed directly on the food, is incredibly alarming, in addition to the ubiquity of use that we see everywhere else. And I just want to show the last clip, and then I have an exciting thing to share about our US release of the film. So can we please play the farmer's realization?
Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have been hurt.
Their side effects, you don't get off free with the kind of chemo that we had.
Sometimes I had upwards of 7 IVs.
10 bags a day.
I had 20 treatments of radiation as well.
I lost 35 pounds.
Al came in and thought I was dead.
I'm sitting here 45 years old. Feel like I'm 90. Because some Roundup.
And so how do you help thousands of people?
She got sick, I got sick, both our dogs died. As I said, my response was, there must be something in the air.
What caused me to get this rare form of cancer?
In the US, you know, we've essentially shifted that obligation to the litigation system.
One day I was watching a commercial and it came by and I was like, hold up.
Attention. Recent studies show that Roundup and other weed killers containing glyphosate can cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma and other forms of cancer.
There's a friend of mine who saw the early ads.
When I saw that flash on the TV, I kind of made all those connections.
The light went off.
He says, I use that stuff all the time, like crazy. I used Roundup. I used it a lot. Oh my gosh, I'm heavily exposed to all this all the time.
In the absence of sufficient regulation, sufficient oversight, good systems of corporate governance, okay, thoughtful and ethical conduct of business, and in the absence and failure along that way, the only system we have is the courts.
I actually thought we were going to watch another clip, so I'll explain that those are a number of plaintiffs who were exposed, who all developed NHL or large diffuse B-cell lymphomas. And in fact, what we learn in the film is that our farmers had been affected as well, and they still don't think that they can make a living without using it, which is something that is incredibly sad and terrible. We were released in Canada last year. We have been pursuing an impact campaign with this film for almost a year now, because we are in an inflection point for regulatory change. We're an inflection point in Canada, where we just presented an 18,000 person petition to Parliament and submitted an Auditor General petition asking the ministries involved to comment on the new science and their continued defense of glyphosate. We did a tour. We went to Brussels and screened for European Parliament. We are trying to have an impact in the States. And I just learned last week that our film is going to be released as an event screening through our distributor Film Movement and Fathom Entertainment on over 600 screens around the country. And these will be in multiplexes where everybody can access and see the film. You have to go into the theater to see it, but you buy your tickets in advance. And I feel like we have another opportunity in the US. So October 3rd is the date that the film will play, and it will be in so many different places that I'm hoping that everybody who wants to see it will be able to see it, all the plaintiffs, all the people who are injured, all the people who are concerned. And of course, you know, given the fact that the EPA has vacated its position on glyphosate and is now reevaluating carcinogenicity and biodiversity loss, we really hope that this film and the work that is being done by the Global Glyphosate Study and the Ramazzini Institute, because it is independent research, will come together somehow in moving people's hearts and minds to do something about this chemical.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm seeing all of the comments. Yes, mark October 3rd. We will be sharing resources with all of you as they become available. Maybe we can do some group watch parties together. That would be amazing. Thank you so much for all of the work you're doing. Please continue to let us know how we can help support you and get this story out into the world. As Jennifer was talking about, there's so much, they're doing work with the Canadian Parliament, the EU Parliament. We have an opportunity in the US. It's a farm bill year. I see a number of my colleagues, including Ariel and others, who are working on our farm bill to shift where American tax dollars go from these monocultured, chemically farmed systems into more of these polyculture systems. I love that phrase, Jennifer. I'm going to be using that, really focusing on how we build soil health and resiliency without these chemical inputs. So thank you so much. We are now going to shift, as many of you know, to a farmer voice, because without our farmers, none of this work happens. And I am so excited to introduce all of you to Ariel Zakarison, who is a 4th-generation farmer in the Palouse region of Washington State, where she farms with her mom, who I think is also on with us today. They have a 600-acre dryland row crop farm, and they began the transition from no-till away from no-till about 3 years ago, actively trying to reduce their chemical inputs as much as possible, experimenting with different biological farming techniques that I'm going to let her talk more about. But many of you in the comments are asking, well, what do we do? How do we get away from glyphosate? We do what Ariel and her mom and her family are experimenting with. So Ariel, talk to us more about what you're doing, what's working, what's not working.
Sure. Yeah. So like Jessica said, we have a 600-acre dryland no-till farming operation in Eastern Washington State. So we're close to Pullman, Washington. The region that we're in is called the Palouse. We have very steep hills, and Whitman County, the county in which our farm is situated, is the top wheat producing county in the United States. So it's wheat country, small grains, a lot of conventional farming. Our farm was a conventional farm until, as Jessica said, about 2018, 2019, when we started to transition to no-till and regenerative ag practices more broadly. I grew up on the farm. I went away for a while. I lived in New York and then Austin. I came back to start farming or helping out on the farm in 2020, and I moved back here permanently to become a farmer full-time in the winter of 2021, 2022. We currently have a 4-year rotation, including a cover crop mix. Right now, we've got a forage triticale with hairy vetch. There's some Phacelia, clover, flax, all kinds of other stuff mixed in. We have a winter triticale pea mix. We're also growing winter peas, and we have a spring grain mix. We try to intercrop as much as possible. We've noticed that the fields that are not intercrop, that just have one type of crop growing on them, don't do as well, and we have increased weed pressure. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. At this point, it's really important to note that we are a very small farm, and we function very differently than a lot of farms raising grain for the commodities market. We run a feed mill on our farm, and so we direct market pretty much everything we grow to other farms within about a 200-mile radius as animal feed. So in addition to our small grains operation, we have this feed mill. We produce 10 to 15 tons per week of non-GMO livestock feed for local meat, egg, and dairy producers. This gives us a lot more flexibility than most farms as far as being able to intercrop and what we're able to grow and what we're able to experiment with. So everything I'm going to talk about as far as how we're able to get, reduce our rates of glyphosate and potentially get away from a lot of these things if possible, as much as possible. These are not things that all farms can currently do, but there are ways that we could change this whole system that we're working in so that some of these techniques are more possible for other larger farmers and farms who are interacting with the commodity market in a different way that we are. So like I said, everything we grow is non-GMO. We don't use any pesticides or fungicides. We're no longer using treated seed. We don't spray any herbicides on a standing crop. So nothing goes on post-emergence except for spot spraying in really, really bad problem areas. And that's usually just thistle. We're even trying to reduce that as much as possible. So the only herbicide use that we currently execute are going to be the burn downs that happen before a crop is sown. So this is a field that's been harvested, and then you're doing what's, we use the scary term, which is appropriate, a burn down. So you're trying to kill everything on the field so that only what you're planting is going to, come through. Just a side note, we have clover in most of our fields. Clover seems to be glyphosate resistant, and that kind of carries over through a burn down. So that's always going to be present in most of our ground, and we want the clover there. It's red clover. It's planted intentionally for that reason. We'll get more to that get to more about that in a minute. So yeah. The rate we use is about 16 to 24 ounces of glyphosate per acre. That's a very reduced rate, but we're still using it. And again, we would really like to not be using it. So we'll kind of talk more about that. About a decade ago, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. We later found out that this is most likely due to paraquat exposure while he was doing field trials with the USDA. We don't use paraquat. Paraquat is not the same as Roundup. I don't want any confusion on that, but I'm bringing this up just because it was a big factor in our decision to try to get away from synthetic inputs. Watching someone you care about or a family member, someone you work with, suffer from this, slow moving, but, pretty intense chronic disease is really upsetting. And it scared everybody on the farm. And it made us not want to create situations in which this is arising for any of us or any of our neighbors. And we really appreciate the awareness that's being raised around, farmers and the interactions with these herbicides that, a lot of people are really, in a lot of ways, forced to use in order to be able to make a living. So let's see. So our goal is to transition to being a no-till organic operation. We're currently no-till. Well, we're certainly not there yet. I'm going to share a little bit about how we're trying to make this happen. In our area, glyphosate is used at rates up to 64 ounces per acre. So not only is this like a dangerously high rate, but it doesn't seem like it's working very well anymore. Rates have gone up pretty significantly over the previous decades, as I understand, just talking from my parents. And so 64 ounces an acre, that's a lot of chemistry to be putting on your ground. So we're glad that we are using less, but it's still not great. So 1 second, sorry. So since we're trying to basically right now, what we're using amounts of glyphosate that we are using go farther. We're doing this by using our tank mix or what we're spraying onto the fields. That includes molasses as well as either a quart of humic acid or 100 ounces of fulvic acid per acre. These are essentially adding carbon and helping the weeds absorb the chemistry more effectively, allowing us to use less chemistry. We also use the surfactant, R11, which changes the surface tension of the spray mix and helps what we're spraying stick to the plant material or to the weeds more effectively. And we use an adjuvant as well to lower the pH of the mix. We have a sprayer that has a boom that sits very low to the ground. So what is getting sprayed out of the sprayer is closer to what it's being sprayed on. There's less drift. It's kind of trying to, go where we put it and be closer to the tissue of the weeds. So that's sort of what we're doing to make our chemistry go farther and use less. What is kind of more important are the other techniques of farming that are enabling us to, hopefully in the future not use this at all. So one of the most important ways we've noticed, at least on our ground, of preventing weeds is to keep the ground covered. So folks who are familiar with no-till systems understand how important this is. You don't want any topsoil exposed for a number of reasons. It's crucial to your mycorrhizal networks, your fungal networks. your soil structure, you know, your mineral content, to have the soil not be disturbed and to have like a residue of previous crops or plants on top of that. So we've noticed pretty clearly that there's significantly less weed pressure in areas where we have a lot of residue. We've also been selecting competitive crops, particularly triticale, that will outcompete weeds and form a canopy that helps control weeds later in the growing season. For those not familiar, triticale is a wheat rye hybrid. So it's intensely competitive. One issue many conventional farmers might have with growing it is that it will volunteer back in later crops. And so that's a big issue for some folks. So let's see, we've also put the majority of our farm into winter crop. They tend to be more competitive in our area, and they emerge before the weeds really get going during the spring. And we feel that intercropping on top of all of that is a really helpful component in getting our crops to outcompete weeds. We just have been noticing overwhelmingly, if you have more than one type of plant in a field, both of those plants do better. And the bigger and healthier the crops are, the more they're going to overshadow those weeds. We were previously using a John Deere 8760 no-till drill with 10-inch spacing to sow our crops. This fall, we're going to be switching to a John Deere N530C, which has 7-inch spacing, so the rows of crops are tighter, closer together. This is going to give us a higher plant population and help us to outcompete weeds. We've also had good results cross-sowing crops with the 10-inch spacing drill, but we've got some really intense steep hills in our area, and so sometimes there's only one way you can drive on a hill to get the crop in, so you're not able to cross-sow. And so this is where the 7-inch spacing is going to, we hope, really be helpful. Yeah. We use livestock to manage weeds as well. So if there's areas where the weed pressure is going to be so high that we can't harvest a crop, we've been trying to graze these areas off where possible. It's not always logistically possible, but we'll either put goats or cattle on some of these spots. This is something that we really hope we're able to do more in the future as well. Incorporation of livestock is great for a number of reasons, especially in a no-till system, but weed control is like an aspect of that. And then we're also going to be roller crimping our cover crop to terminate it this summer. So hopefully that technology is going to make it so we won't ever have to terminate a cover crop with glyphosate or by chemical means. So essentially the roller crimper, you're squishing the plant at a certain stage where it snaps and breaks. And, you know, alternative means of terminating would be to burn the entire thing down with glyphosate. We also need to change, I think, just broadly as a society and as farmers, how we see weeds and what they're telling us about what's going on in our soil. We've started doing sap analysis tests on some of the weeds, particularly pretty prickly lettuce that we have, and we found that it was cycling nutrients. So it was taking molybdenum and, you know, different things in the soil and kind of bringing them to the top. It was also, you know, it's got this big taproot, and we're like, well, maybe it's helping us with compaction. So I'm not saying that everyone can tolerate weeds in their system. Obviously, you can't have so many weeds that you can get a crop off, but this idea that we need to have these fields where you're not seeing anything but wheat plants or but pea plants or but exactly what you planted there, getting away from that idea to some extent is probably going to be, you know, essential in changing the culture around herbicide use.
Thank you so much, Ariel. I hate to have to cut you off there, but we want to have a couple minutes for wrap up. If you all are not familiar with roller crimpers, I highly recommend Googling videos. I find it incredibly soothing to watch them move through the field. So thank you so much. And as Ariel said, what works for them may not work for you. A lot of this is trial and error, is relearning a lot of these skills that so many farmers have been trained out of doing because glyphosate was easy and glyphosate was safe. And now we know that that is not actually the case. So with that, I would like to invite our speakers, Jennifer, Daniele, Melissa, to come back up on screen. We're going to wrap with just a quick go around focusing on, we've just heard an incredible amount of information. We have heard scientific data. We've heard the human impact data. We've heard the soil impact data, all of these pieces, so that we all leave here we all have the urgency leaving for here, but so that we leave here with a purpose. What is your individual call to action within your work, within all of this amazing data that we've just heard? So we're going to actually start with Ariel and work backwards through our lineup. So we'll go Ariel and then Jennifer. Ariel, what can we do to support your work?
I would just think folks, I know everyone's thinking about their health when they purchase food and when they decide to eat and how it was produced, but we also need to be thinking about the health of farmers. So have that in your mind and make your choices accordingly.
Thank you so much. Jennifer.
And I will say that I can't do an exact call to action, although I think everybody should support the Global Glyphosate Study if they can, because they need resources to finish that study. And we are very keen on getting those results so that we can use that and disseminate it in a screening series through the EU in the fall, particularly in the countries that are as yet undecided about the way that they will vote. But I will say that we have a number of excellent ENGO partners in the US, and we will be coming up with a call to action with them, in conjunction with them, that will be part of our release on October 3rd. So stay tuned for that.
And maybe we all meet up with our snacks and our handbags and go see the movie on October 3rd.
Yes, please.
All right, Daniele, and then Melissa to wrap us up.
So I thank you very much, Jennifer. I hope you can consider, first of all, to donate to our crowdfunding campaign, because the Global Glyphosate Study is what we call your study. So it's an independent study done for answering a question that really nobody wanted to tackle apart from a bunch of us independent academic institutions. But as generally happens for independent science, it's really difficult to find funding in every country. So I hope you can consider that. And I also suggest to keep an eye on our website, and hopefully we will get back to you by the end of the year, more results from the study. Thank you so much.
Daniele, as soon as you have more results, we will have another webinar. We are here to support the fundraising and the dissemination of all of this amazing work. All right, Melissa, wrap us up.
Absolutely. Wow. This has been such a great multimodal, multi-perspective webinar. I've really enjoyed every single moment of it and thrilled to see the attendance. I know that you all are sitting there saying, I care about these things a lot. These are really, really important issues. Most importantly, don't feel overwhelmed by any means. This is a time for action. There is so much that you can do as an individual, as a citizen, as a parent, as a community member, as a friend, and as a member of an organization. There's so much that you can do simply by informing yourself. Now we move forward to ensure that the best science possible is put out. And I do see a lot of traction. So I said I've been at this for a long time. I'm seeing very important traction. And the data that are coming out of the Global Glyphosate Study is at the heart of awareness and attention and definitive understanding as to how glyphosate is impacting health. So please do. That's why I'm here. Because I'm a collaborator and a long-term supporter of the Global Glyphosate Study. Please do support it, and just know that each and every one of you can make a difference in this issue.
Thank you all so much for joining us across the time zones, across the ocean, through the flooding. We so greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for listening and engaging. The chat has been amazing. You are all sharing resources together, which exactly is what this work is about, is community. For everyone who dropped questions that we weren't able to answer in the webinar, we will get you answers. Stay tuned. We will be sharing those when we share this recording next week. Please feel free to share the recording widely. Again, we are building community to move more and more towards the change that we all want to see in our food system. So thank you all so very, very much. We appreciate your time and your energy. and your passion on this work, and we hope to see you all very soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Ciao, Daniele.